Welcome everyone to this explainer. Today we're unpacking one of the absolute most critical and honestly most complex challenges facing South Asia right now, Pakistan's escalating water security crisis. We're going to look way past the daily headlines and dig straight into the data, the policies, and the real on-the-ground realities. We need to understand exactly how a nation, historically defined by the mighty Indus River, is now facing a severe threat to its very survival. So get ready, because the stakes here literally couldn't be higher, and the clock is ticking.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this emergency, we have to look at a staggering historical contrast. Back in 1950, Pakistan actually had an abundance of water. We're talking around 5,000 cubic meters available per person every single year. But, well, look at where we are today. That number has plummeted to under 860 cubic meters per capita. It's just a massive, precipitous drop in only a few generations, and it fundamentally changes the entire trajectory of the country's economic and human development.
Okay, let's dive into what that plunge actually means in practical terms. Internationally, a country is considered water-stressed if it falls below 1,700 cubic meters. But once you drop below 1,000 cubic meters, you enter the highly dangerous territory of absolute water scarcity. A massive population boom, growing from around 34 million in 1951 to over 240 million today, has rapidly accelerated this decline, pushing the entire nation well below that critical scarcity threshold. So, you're probably wondering, where is all this water actually going? To answer that, we have to zoom in on the primary culprit consuming the vast majority of this dwindling resource.
Section 1. Agriculture's massive thirst.
Now, what's incredibly interesting here is how one single sector drastically dominates the picture. Agriculture accounts for a whopping 95% of all the fresh water used annually in Pakistan. It completely dwarfs industrial and household use, which sit at just 3% and 2% respectively. This single piece of data really anchors the entire structural problem. Basically, if you want to understand Pakistan's water crisis, you absolutely have to understand how it farms.
And unfortunately, the way it farms is, well, deeply inefficient. Traditional flood irrigation, where water is simply flooded over the fields, leads to a massive 40 to 60% loss of water just through evaporation, seepage, and runoff. Because of this, canal water use efficiency in major agricultural hubs is alarmingly below 40%. Now, contrast that with modern alternatives like drip irrigation, which delivers water directly to the plant roots and actually saves 30 to 60% of water. Yet, despite these obvious game-changing benefits, these modern methods are used on less than 5% of irrigated land.
These inefficiencies create a cascading series of structural failures. First off, unlined canals result in about 24 million acre-feet, or MAF, of water lost purely to seepage. Because all this surface water is wasted, farmers are forced to turn to unregulated groundwater extraction, which is causing water tables in populated areas to drop by over 200 feet. And to top the whole thing off, a culture of subsidized water tariffs heavily underprices the water, meaning there is absolutely zero financial incentive for users to conserve it. This matters profoundly because this immense waste leaves Pakistan with an average wheat yield of around 3 tons per hectare. That's significantly below the global average, heavily threatening long-term food security. But farming is just one part of the equation. We also need to zoom out and look at the macro-environmental and geopolitical pressures that are violently squeezing an already fragile system.
Section 2. Climate and border challenges.
On top of all those systemic inefficiencies we just talked about, Pakistan ranks among the top 10 countries most vulnerable to climate change. Temperatures are rising by 0.3 degrees Celsius every single decade. This completely accelerates the retreat of the Himalayan glaciers, which is a massive crisis, because glacial melt contributes over 60% of the Indus River's flow. Add in some wildly fluctuating weather patterns, and you get these severe, devastating flood and drought cycles, like the catastrophic 2022 floods that displaced 33 million people and caused $30 billion in damage. The historical flow of the river system is literally evaporating.
Then you have the geopolitical layer, which we can understand purely by looking at the hard data of its impacts. Internally, there is deep interprovincial mistrust over the Indus River System Authority, or IRCA. Disputes over the 1991 Water Apportionment Accord, particularly between Punjab and Sindh, lead to very real, quantifiable impacts. We're talking 15 to 20% crop yield drops in Sindh during dry years. Externally, transboundary strains further reduce access. India's Kashanganga Dam construction diverts flow, resulting in a 16% reduction downstream in Pakistan's Neelam Valley. On the western border, a lack of formal water-sharing treaties with Afghanistan leaves vital shared aquifers in the Kabul River Basin entirely unutilized, essentially starving already water-scarce western provinces. Now, beyond the macroeconomics, the climate data, and the policy disputes, there is a very real, very urgent, everyday human toll that this scarcity inflicts on the population.
Section 3. The human cost. Let's just pause here to let this massive number sink in. 22 million. That is the number of people in Pakistan right now who completely lack access to clean drinking water. And the vast majority of these individuals, about 84%, reside in rural areas.
And this brilliantly, or rather tragically, illustrates the severe economic punishment inflicted on marginalized communities. In urban centers like Karachi, informal settlements often don't receive any official water supply at all. They're forced to rely on private, completely unregulated water tankers. While official piped water might cost 1 to 2 rupees per liter, that tanker water can cost up to 20 rupees per liter. Because of this massive disparity, low-income households are forced to spend up to 10% of their entire monthly income just on basic survival, just to have water.
We also see the burden falling incredibly disproportionately on women and children. In rural areas, like Thar Parkar, women spend an average of 3 hours every single day simply walking to fetch water. Think about that for a second. This isn't just a minor inconvenience, it is a fundamental barrier to socioeconomic mobility. Those are 3 hours completely stripped away from education, stripped away from income-generating activities, and stripped away from personal development. But look, this explainer isn't just about outlining the doom and gloom. The data clearly establishes that this disastrous trajectory can be changed, but it's going to require highly targeted, comprehensive action.
Section 4. Fixing the system.
First things first, we have to look at the money. There is a severe underinvestment in the water sector. Right now, budgetary allocations for water infrastructure average less than 0.5% of Pakistan's GDP. Experts strongly suggest that to make a real dent, this needs to jump to at least 2 to 3% of GDP. Without this required funding, the resources needed to line those leaking canals we talked about, or subsidize drip irrigation, or fix heavily sedimented dams, are simply missing from the equation. So, the crucial point is that a concrete roadmap does exist. Step 1. Heavily invest in modernizing agriculture by lining canals and rapidly expanding drip irrigation to reverse that massive 95% consumption drain. Step 2. Tackle urban waste by implementing smart, volumetric metering so people actually pay for exactly what they use, which would curb the current 350 liters per person daily average. Step 3. Strengthen overall governance by establishing independent, transparent grievance reviews at IRSA. This is absolutely essential to build trust and ensure equitable water distribution between the provinces.
So let's recap. We've seen the terrifying historical drop in water availability, the massive agricultural inefficiencies, the cascading climate threats, and the absolutely devastating human cost. The solutions are technically clear, for sure, but they require immense political will and immediate massive financial investment. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought to chew on. Will Pakistan manage to completely shift its water governance paradigm, or will meaningful action be delayed until the well runs entirely dry? It's literally a question of absolute survival. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.